What is up, everybody? James Jackson here, back again with another video. If you're new to my channel, I do tips, tricks, news, and reviews for the film and video making industry. So if you do like the content here, please subscribe to the channel, hit that bell, and hit those likes. It really does help the channel out. And basically, you can stay up to date on all the content going forth. So today, I wanted to give you my first initial tests with the new firmware update. If you haven't heard, last night Canon put out firmware 1.1, which didn't put out any major new features coming to the cameras like C-Log 2, C-Log 3, or the Canon RAW Lite that we have been rumored to hear coming. Instead, addressed some bug fixes, including some heating issue fixes. Now, it didn't fix the overheating issues. Let's just get that right out the gate. But what it has done, it has definitely improved run times as well as recovery times. And we'll go all into that today. But first, let's go into the new features that have came out with this firmware, which is basically a bug. The quick thing that I want to just get out of the way is that it improved the Ibis for certain lenses that may have some of the issues, particularly the wider lenses that have the wobble effect. It basically improved the lens stabilization with the Ibis. It may basically improve those. I haven't fully tested that out yet because it was late last night and I wasn't trying to run around everywhere. So that has seemed to be addressed. I'll see for myself if that's the case. The next thing, and the rest is pretty much dealing with heating and overheating and managing the heating of the camera. The first one, and this is to me a pretty big one, especially if you're using external recorders like this guy right here, the Atomos Ninja Inferno. I love it. This thing basically resolves any issues I have in terms of the 4K HQ or even 4K 60. I pretty much can run almost with over 2 hours with no issues with this Atomos Ninja Inferno, and basically it works like a gem. Before the firmware update, when you went out the HDMI, it would deactivate the heat management tool that's into the camera, which pretty much means if you were basically, even if you weren't using something like the Atomos Ninja or some sort of external recorder, and instead you were just using something simple like to monitor, like say you were recording 8K or 4K 120 and you just wanted an external monitor to monitor it, it actually drastically reduced the time you have before the camera would set to that overheat timer. It would expire and it would shut down. It's because the heat management was not active. Now, with firmware 1.1, you can actually basically have that heat management tool active as you're connected via HDMI. So that is a pretty big improvement if you're using any sort of external monitor, whether if it's just a monitor or a recorder. This is the big point that we're about to talk right now, and that is the fact that it improved the ambient heat detection, to which allows you to get longer both record times as well as shorter cooldown times. So apparently Canon has 3 heat sensors in this camera. The first one is to detect the heating around the sensor. The next one was to detect heating around the media cards. And then the last one is really to detect the ambient heat around, that is on the outside of the camera. And that seems to be the thing that they targeted with this firmware update. And so understand, if you're doing long continuous record runtimes, your runtime extensions are not that drastically improved unless you are shooting in a very cool environment, which again, I'll discuss that later. But again, even in those environments, it's not that drastically improved. However, if you are doing something with, especially with the 8K as well as the 4K 120, where you're doing more burst record modes, this is a drastic improvement because in those burst modes, you can turn the camera off and start the recovery time process. So I did a test yesterday where I was basically recording 8K for, I just want to see how long I can record 8K continuously. Now, it gave me a 15-minute time window when I started recording the camera. Just straight out the rip, it gave me a 15-minute record time. I was able to push that all the way up to 26 minutes before I even got the overheat warning. And in fact, I actually ran out of media space, uh, and the camera basically filled up the card before I even got even a single overheat warning in 8K RAW, which is a drastic improvement for me compared to where I was before, where around the 18-minute mark is when I would get the overheat warning and then I would just shut it off. By the way, I never push it to the actual shutdown point. As soon as I get the warning, I turn the camera off. That's just how I shoot. I know everybody's a little differently, but I've also seen with that process that I actually get to recover a lot more time if I don't push the camera to that overheat shutdown point. So, but either way, it didn't matter at that point because once I filled up a 512 gigabyte CF Express card, that pretty much to me passed the test because then you got to replace the card and shut it down and let it cool down anyway. So, in terms of 8K RAW, at least, I was able to get one much more improved run times, as well as I didn't even get the overheat warning when I got to that that media limit. However, this next part is really probably the most intriguing and important part, which was after I basically ran out of media space, I switched over to my SD card, which is a 126 gigabytes pro grade V90 SD card. And basically, I then switched the mode to 4K HQ, which is still viable to record on the SD card. And when I did that, I got the notification that I basically got 2 minutes of record time left on the timer. So when that happened, I basically shut the camera off. And basically, this was sort of me testing the down period. Now, I should point out that there is some key variables with my sort of test that you should be aware of. The first variable that you guys should be aware of is the fact that I am using an external battery whenever I'm recording video, especially if I'm doing these long take videos like this. I actually have the Core SWX Power Base Edge. It's actually technically a V-mount battery, but you can actually attach it to the bottom of your camera. And basically, I'm inserting a dummy battery into the camera, which, based on my experience with this, definitely helps prolong the runtime beyond the heat timer, because you're not allowing heat to generate in that battery compartment. It's going only directly into the V-mount battery below it. And also for the fact that the runtime, by the way, on this battery is amazing. It allows you to run up to 7.5 hours of continuous powering the camera, which means I pretty much got an entire day's worth of runtime with this one battery. So I'll definitely leave a link to this external battery in the description below so you can get the pack. It's about $235, which is like $100 less than what Canon's battery grip is. And at least for video, obviously I wouldn't say this for photography because this may feel a little wonky, but if you were a video shooter, this is a definite must buy. The second variable that you guys need to know about is the fact that I am recording in my family's basement. It's not my basement, I'm actually visiting family. I'm in my family's basement right now, and it stays at a constant temperature of 65 degrees. So it's relatively cool down here. So because of that, I actually decided to see what will happen to the camera in terms of recovery time if you put it in a more cooler ambient environment. And what I found is basically what Gordon Lang himself sort of found when testing sort of his doing his sort of semi-refrigerator test. It's basically every single minute that I let the camera shut down, I got a minute back in recovery time. So I let the camera basically cool down for about 12 to 13 minutes. And remember, when I shut the camera down, I was at 2 minutes of supposedly record time left before overheating. When I switched the camera back on, I was back all the way up to 15 minutes. And this is 4K HQ. So pretty much it seems to be the same, that if you're in cooler environments, you can now get every minute you let the camera cool down, you get a minute back. Now, if you do sort of burst mode, you can sort of prolong this time period, by basically shutting the camera off, let it sit for like a minute, and then turn it back on, get a minute of record time back. But there's actually even a discovery I accidentally came across after that initial test, which was I went to see, okay, how long I can go longer. So I decided, let's do it for like an additional 10 minutes. So basically a 20-minute cooldown period. However, I made the mistake of not turning the camera off. The screen went to sleep, but the camera was still on. And it looked like and eventually it went to sleep. So when the 10-minute came back, all of a sudden I turned the camera on. It was still at 15 minutes. So then I turned the camera off. But then literally I turned the camera back on 20 seconds later. And the camera went from 15 minutes to 25 minutes. So just by turning the camera off for a few minutes, because again, it's still relatively cool, and the camera was still cool to the touch. It was still technically on, but it was just put to sleep. But because of the colder ambient temperature, it was still able to recover like a minute of recording time for every minute it was in the sleep mode in the cooler environment. Now this, to me, is a very big finding for the simple fact that now something like third-party products like Tilta's cooling cage kit can actually be seen possibly as a viable solution when you're not recording. You can probably use those if it works how it's supposed to be, making the ambient temperature around the camera cooler. It may be possible that you can actually still use these same things in much hotter environments, like outside during the hot dog days of summer, and still be able to get that 1 minute per record time recovery per minute of cool down, sleep, or turn off. So let's make it clear, this does not address the overheating issue. It's still there, but clearly Canon is listening. So continue to address your concerns to Canon, because clearly they're making adjustments to that. So just keep pushing them, and hopefully we'll see more improvements. But what this does show is that if you're able to keep the camera in some sort of cool ambient environment, it does speed up both the recovery time as well as the actual prolonging of record times. So this is a definite major improvement from the previous version. So if you haven't checked out the firmware, go ahead and download it. I will also leave a link in the description to where you can download the firmware. And honestly, the installment is pretty simple, straightforward. So I would definitely, it's not complicated at all. But I just wanted to give you guys my thoughts on this. Let me know what you guys think about this. Leave a like, leave a comment below. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. And until next time, take care, everyone.